To order. And we have, believe it or not, already a Senate bill for consideration. We have the distinguished President of the Senate with us, and certainly the Chair would call on Senator Johnson for a brief explanation of your legislation, and we'll then assign it to a subcommittee for expeditious handling over here, sir.
Thank you very much, John. I am honored to I understand the process you're going to, so I'd like to give you a brief explanation, and we'll come back later.
That's true.
I got a call from a constituent who was in a contest over the value of their property. Of course, you have to pay taxes on the 85%. He won the case. They owed him back money, and the interest is capped at $150. And this was Savannah's only major high-rise. They owed him tens of thousands of dollars in interest, and of course, the taxpayer had to pay them. So we started out just trying to equalize it. And after a lot of negotiations, have equalized both the government and the taxpayer to $150, except for the government doesn't pay you the money within 60 days. That will then trigger the 12% standard interest that's in the law now. There's a little bit of a work that will need to be done by your committee, Mr. Chairman, to what triggers that 60 days so the city knows that the Board of Equalization have reached an agreement. So there still is some work that y'all could help on the bill with. But the bottom line is we're trying to equalize the taxpayer and the government the same way in who owes interest to the other.
Thank you. Any questions for the Senator? Senator, we'll assign this to our ad valorem subcommittee that's chaired by Representative Royal. And as soon as you're ready for a hearing over there, or your attorneys are, or whatever we might need to do for a committee sub, necessary, let him know, and we'll set it up as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
The subcommittee chairman knows a lot about the subject.
We'll look forward to working with you, sir. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 195, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 195 by Representative Golick and others. To amend Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to revenue taxation so as to amend amounts of retirement income includable in the Georgia taxable net income.
Chair recognizes the Governor's floor leader, Representative Golick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, and on behalf of Governor Sonny Perdue, thank you for this opportunity to discuss House Bill 195. House Bill 195 is the Governor's proposal to phase in an increase in the amount of the exclusion from state income tax. Currently, as you know, in tax year 2007, we have an exclusion of $30,000 in retirement income from state income tax. That goes up to $35,000 for tax year 2008. The Governor's proposal would increase that amount to an exclusion of $65,000 of retirement income for tax year 2009, and that is for individuals 65 and older. That would increase to $100,000 for tax year 2010, again 65 and older. In 2011, it would increase further to $150,000 of retirement income excluded from state income tax. 2012 would go up to $200,000, and then by the year 2013, all retirement income would be eliminated for Georgians age 65 and older, again by the year 2013. And that is essentially the bill.
Are there any questions for the author of this legislation from the members of the committee? Chair recognizes Representative Jameson. Which number are you, please? 28?
28, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Golick.
Yes, ma'am.
I assume that when we say retirement income, we're leaving intact the same definition that's in place now for the $30,000 and $35,000.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's all income other than earned wages. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. It essentially includes all income sources other than earned income.
And when we say taxpayer, we're meaning the taxpayer and the spouse if both of them qualify. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
So we could be talking about an amount of $400,000 per tax return at some time in the future.
It is possible.
And this is in addition to Social Security, which we currently do not tax in
That is
Georgia.
correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Flood. Is that 25?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gold, would this income tax allowance apply for a taxpayer who may have earned retirement income in, say, North Carolina or New York or California and moved to Georgia and therefore was retired after their working years, and those earnings would have been accrued in other states?
I don't believe there's any preclusion. I don't think there's any distinction with regard to where they did work. Retirement income, for purposes of the bill, and I'm subject to correction, Mr. Chairman, retirement income is retirement income. If they're here in the state of Georgia and they have retirement income that they're getting in, that would not be subject to state income tax, again, over the phase-in period.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, have any further? Other questions for the author of the bill? I have one, and before we assign it, and I'm looking at the fiscal note. Have you had an opportunity to see the fiscal note?
Yes, sir.
It would seem to me to be a logical inference that there would be positive revenue generated by both the retention of our retired community and also the attraction of Georgia as a place to retire, especially with incomes that are sort of above the subsistence level. It would be logical, I think, to infer that if only 15 to 30,000 of my income were exempt from tax, that I probably am not at that level going to generate a lot of sales tax, because most of my expenditures would be for housing and food, which are exempt already from sales tax of my necessities. But when we get over a certain level, and I don't know what that might be, the analytical people that help us probably could presume certain budgets. But I note in the fiscal note that it's not addressed at all. Do you have any comments about that? It would seem to me that this could actually wind up being revenue positive in many circumstances for our state coffers as an economic development attraction, but I don't see that anywhere in the fiscal.
It is.
I don't know why. Do you have any idea?
It
why?
is, Mr.
No?
Chairman, and I don't know why it's not on the fiscal note. I suppose perhaps that technically it might be speculative, but if we take a giant step back and think about it, yes, on the surface, obviously, first and foremost, it's putting more income of senior citizens, retirement income, in their pocket to use however they want to use it, whether it's for prescription drugs or whether it's for their grandchildren or whatever it may be. Let me also take a step back and say that retirement income, I think there may be an unfortunate take on that at some point where retirement income is not just for rich people. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're making $25,000, $35,000, or however much more. People are putting money away into 401ks, they're putting money away into IRAs, they're putting money away to the extent that they can. So wherever you may be on the socioeconomic scale, you're going to, if you've saved and you have retirement income of some sort, whatever it may be, you'll benefit by this over the course of time, and of course, fully depending on your income. But the economic development piece of that, Mr. Chairman, really can't be underestimated. We're losing retirees to Florida, certainly. We may be losing them to other states as well. This particular measure will act as an incentive over the course of time, really over the course of generations, to incent individuals who worked in Georgia to retire here in Georgia. And that will, over the course of time, help in terms of economic development. As part of retirement, people will have more money in their pocket, and they will spend more money on other things. If they know they can keep that in Georgia, and they'll spend it on other things here in Georgia, that will help our revenue base, and that's a good thing.
Commerce as well. Thank you. Further
Thank you.
questions? Mr. Leader, we're going to assign that to our income tax subcommittee, and if you'll just be in contact with the chairman of that committee, and we'll get that matter heard and debated as quickly as possible. We thank you for this legislation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Did you have anything else today besides that?
No, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 59, please.
House Bill 59 to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use tax.
Chair recognizes Representative Alan Powell. Is he with us? Representative Powell? Is he notified of the meeting? Was he aware that?
Yes, sir. All the officers.
Okay, we'll put that at the end of our stack. If anybody sees Representative Powell come in, please let us know. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 87, substitute actually for House Bill 87, please. Never mind. That's going to be Representative Sims, and he asked to be excused for the next 30 minutes on that one. So we'll save that one, too. House Bill, is Representative Day with us? Does anybody care about their legislation around here lately? Any volunteers? Anybody here? Okay, thank you. Representative Lynn Smith is with us. Mr. Secretary, if you would please first read House Bill 128, and after which I'll recognize you to present your bill.
House Bill 128, Representative Smith, the 70th, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to exemptions from sales and use tax.
Chair proudly recognizes the Chairman of Natural Resources, Representative Lynn Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 128, which is always considered by this committee every year because of the sunset provision. Essentially what this legislation does this year is provide for sales tax holidays. The first one is school supplies from August the 2nd, 2007 to August the 5th, 2007, and the second one is for the energy efficient products for the energy efficient month of October. So this one is from October the 4th, 2007 to October the 7th, 2007, and the exemptions are the same as the committee agreed upon last year and as the House voted on in the Senate and approved by the governor.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Representative Smith? Trying to see if we've got any first-year people that might not already be very familiar with this, because this has been something we've done for a lot of years. Anybody? No questions? Gosh, you just wowed the entire committee, Representative Smith, as usual. We'll assign that to the Sales Tax Subcommittee, and we look forward to you presenting the bill again there in a much more detailed fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee.
Representative Tillman, okay. Mr. Secretary, this is a combination bill situation. If you would please read for the committee House Bill 129 and also how that affects House Bill 230.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. HB 129 by Representative Tumlin to amend Title 48 Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to revenue and taxation so as to repeal certain obsolete provisions relating to tax amnesty program. And HB 230 by Representative Tumlin to amend Article 2, Chapter 2, Title 48 Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to state administration of revenue and taxation so as to reenact certain provisions regarding penalties, fees, and costs with respect to tax deficiencies.
Chair will leave it up to the author of these two bills to determine the order of which he chooses to present. We recognize Representative Tumlin to present your two bills and their relationship to each other to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. This is a case of simplicity gone bad. It's a situation for the obsolete law. We hadn't had tax amnesty in this state since 1992, and for property tax since 1994. So I drafted a bill to have these two deleted, but there are four little words in multiple places in this code called "or any other law." So there's some collection provisions in these statutes that aren't being used per se that would have cost our state government about $120 million. So we're trying to make this revenue neutral. So the first bill would be an obsolete bill to get rid of those two provisions, and then the second bill, which is 129, House Bill 230, puts them in to me the proper place of the code in Article 2 of Title 48 of Chapter 2. And it just enumerates the collection. They're basically, the collection procedures aren't statutory. They allow the tax commissioner to do it by regulation. And it's just to catch past due taxes. But if we'd have thrown out here, it would have had dire consequences.
Any questions for the presenter, or is there anybody on the committee understands anything he just said? I'll take either. Well, then I have. Could you maybe? What we do have one 19. Is that? No. No.
Neither, Mr. Chairman.
You want me to try again?
Could you tell us specifically which provision you're trying to leave in the law, so to speak, and yet cure the amnesty eradication from the law?
All right. To go back there again, when the state of Georgia adopted the tax amnesty, it was for the years 1992 and prior, and it ended then. It was not meant to go any further. So when I'm asking for that section to be, and to further give reason, when you go through the Georgia Code and you see it, you think we do have tax amnesty, and we do not have it in any way. In fact, there's some belief, I think, with the Revenue Commissioner, there are people that are misled and they're waiting for tax amnesty to come back. So there's a psychological thing that we should get rid of, besides getting rid of obsolete bills. But in it, if you go to House Bill 230 and you go to Section 1, it refers to Code Section 48262. This will be a brand new provision that comes from this items that we're trying to delete, and it comes from 481610, which is a 20% collection that applied not only to amnesty bills but to all other taxes. It was a collection procedure that is discretionary by the Revenue Commissioner. And if we completely delete it, we would lose what this now 48262 would be.
But this is not an additional fee that the Commissioner can impose on taxpayers. It's just a transfer of a fee that's already in law to another code section where it's much easily understood. Is that a good summary of what's happening here?
And I think, to make it easier, I can improve my communication. Under most of the penalties in the collection, the administration is under this 48.2 section, basically 1 through 60, I think 61 now. And this other was slid way over into the chapter under the old Title 17, under Chapter 17. So really, we're putting it in the proper place. But it's completely neutral because all that wording was previously in 481610. So we're taking one part of the code and putting it into another part of the code, just explicit language.
Okay. Any other questions for the author? We're going to assign that Representative Tumlin to the our Public Finance Subcommittee, and if you want to just be in touch with the chairman of that committee at your convenience, we'll set up hearings on that for you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I was being a little flippant with you, but what you're doing is very important stuff, and I commend you for that. 87. Okay, 140. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 140, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Representative Willard of the 49th, HB 140, to amend Article 2, Chapter 8 of Title 48 of Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the joint county municipal sales tax, so as to revise and change procedures and requirements regarding the renegotiation and distribution of certificates.
Chair recognizes the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary non-civil, I guess it is, committee. Civil, that's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been here a few years, and I go back to the time when I started, I was fortunate enough to be on state planning and community affairs, which was chaired by Mr. Royal, and this was the early part of this 2000, and we've just gone through the reallocation requirements of the law dealing with the local option sales tax between the counties and the cities. It was a very contentious issue between the counties and cities, and what I've seen is there's been hard feelings that have even lasted to this date because of the requirements of the law in trying to work out these agreements between the cities and counties. I know in talking to Mr. Royal back then, we all agreed something had to be done to try and prevent this again from occurring in the future. But I think it's gone through 2 cycles, had they not, with this problem about renegotiation of the local agreements. So as I said and thought about it, I tried to find a way that would do 2 things. Would be really a form of trying to compel the cities and counties to work together for a solution to these formulas, and leaving the inability as a possibility at the end to find a way that there would be a solution that both of them would be able to live with. This bill is my attempt to do that. I stand before you saying that I have worked with the GMA representatives and I've worked with the ACCG representatives, and all of them have signed on saying this is an acceptable solution. And what it does, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I call it baseball arbitration. And I do that as a means of how to come to this final decision, because just in arbitration in baseball, they went through it a few times, and then they realized this was not the best way to try to solve the problem. We had to solve it ourselves. So very rarely now do you see arbitration between the players and management in baseball. And what we do in this agreement is, or this legislation, is we have both sides go through their statutory required mediation, arbitration, to the point that they can't reach an agreement. Then each side, which would be the county and most of the cities, would prepare what is their best offer. And that best offer, by having one party file a pleading with the court, would be required now to go to court with the county setting forth its best agreement and the city side setting forth its best agreement. There would be a judge selected from outside that circuit, so we'd have as impartial a person as we could find to make this final decision. And that judge is going to make his decision based upon the arguments presented by each side between taking either the county agreement or the city agreement. Now, in doing so, I suggest to you that we probably will not see disagreement between the counties and cities to the point that this is going to go to court. But if there is an acceptable means for reaching that agreement that both sides say we did the best we could. And the judge now makes that final decision. It's not trying to reach an agreement between the two. It will be accepting one or the other as far as the agreements proposed from each side. One other step in this process that we've added, it has been I think part of the hammer held in the past, and that is, well, if you don't reach an agreement, says the county perhaps, if you don't reach an agreement, we're going to stop the local option sales tax. We'll just do away with it and perhaps go to a host tax or something. Both sides have also agreed that the only way that a local option sales tax can be terminated is by having a referendum of the people saying we want the tax stopped. In the past, we started the tax. That is a requirement now of the law. If you're going to have a local option sales tax, the people have to vote it in. What this now does is say the people, if they want to make that decision, will do so by voting it out. That's about as simplistic a definition of the bill.
Sounds a little to me almost like a special master kind of situation in a condemnation.
Well, it is, but you see the problem we have, we can't, I think, constitutionally mandate that the cities and counties have to accept what is an arbitration. They are required to accept what is an order of the court. So what we're doing here is we're setting up a statutory litigation if the two sides are unable to reach that agreement.
But it's a non-binding arbitration, as I understood what you said.
Up to the point that it goes to court, Mr. Chairman, up to that point. Once it's in court, now they each submit what is their best proposal, and the court will decide between those after having argument.
Okay. And you say both the city folks and the ACCG folks agree on this bill?
I believe if they're here, there's a gentleman. You want to speak to that point?
Yes. That's a long enough speech. Any other questions for the author of this legislation? Now, this is the chairman of Judiciary that will grill you for hours in his committee. This is your
Chairman,
chance.
I got to tell you the story. I had 2 bills before my committee today, and both of them got tabled. So they show no mercy at that committee.
Yes. Who's 27? Yeah, Chairman Austin Scott.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, whatever tool you used to get the cities and the counties to work together, I would like to either borrow that from you, or if you would allow me to send the annexation legislation that's currently in my committee to yours, whichever way you prefer. If I could borrow the tool you used, or
just power of
if you would
persuasion.
accept the legislation.
I suggest we style it the miracle legislation of 07 if you've gotten their agreement on an issue. Chair recognizes Representative Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, in quickly looking through here, there's nothing in this legislation that would prevent a county and a municipality from using population as their means of determining the division of the monies.
Absolutely, no, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
If you look at the provision, talking about the working out of the agreement, they are still to take into account the provisions currently under the law as those measures to be addressed as a part of the agreement. And population is one of them.
Thank you.
Further questions for the author? Chair seeing none. Chairman Willard, we're going to assign this to our sales tax subcommittee, and if you'll be in touch with the chairman over there, they'll be glad to set up the hearing. We thank you for bringing this, what looks to be very good legislation.
Appreciate that very much.
Let's see. Sims back. What do we got on him? Which one is this? All right, Mr. Secretary, first reading on House Bill 87, please, sir.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's a committee substitute for that, LC 186177S, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to exemptions from sales and use tax, so as to provide for exemption for a limited period of time with respect to the sale of certain machinery and equipment used directly in the production of, certain agricultural things.
Blueberries and peaches, is that right?
Lots and lots of them.
Okay, all right. Chair recognizes the distinguished vice chairman of this committee. Representative Sims, please present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you the substitute, which would be in the back of the fiscal note, House Bill 87. Basically, what we've done in this is add to the already existing exemption of blueberries, peaches, and blackberries at this time. Basically, these crops are most of these folks have row crops or tending crops of other substantial types of crops in their farming endeavors. These were inadvertently left out in the first exemption. There are certain farms that only do blueberries, peaches, and blackberries. I don't know about blackberries, but I know that there are farms that just do peaches and blueberries. Most farms, though, have other crops that they are growing at this time with the exemption. All this does is exempts the sales tax on the equipment that's used, the rolling stock, which would be the tractors or something that actually has a motor and would be powered by a motor, that would actually do the harvesting of and tilling of those crops. Basically, Mr. Chairman, that's all this bill does.
Any members of the committee have any questions for the author? You should see a fiscal note in your file with the bill, too. We got that in everybody's file? Any questions? Chair recognizes Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps you can help me, Representative Sims. This bill applies to peaches, blackberries, and blueberries.
Yes, sir.
Only.
Yes, sir.
Why limit it to just those three?
They were the other crops are already exempted Representative Flood. They're already exempted. These were just add-ons to that exemption. I don't think that the Revenue Department is actually charging the sales tax on a tractor, say, that's going to a farm that is primarily a farm for, say, corn or peanuts or cotton. If he's buying a tractor for that kind of operation, the sales tax is already exempt on that. But if he happens to be growing blueberries and he uses that tractor just for the blueberries, they could come back and maybe charge him for the sales tax on that. But more than likely, he's going to use that tractor for all purposes on his farm. This is just to basically give a better rendition of the exemption to include those berry crops.
Chairman Lewis?
Can I
Oh, I'm sorry. Follow.
So, just so I understand, are all purchases of equipment exempt from sales tax in the use of farming?
That's correct.
So why not just say that?
I don't know. This was brought to me by those farmers.
Okay. Just curious.
Chairman Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, just one question. Are there actually blackberry farms?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
They actually grow them. I know you and I know they grow wild in the woods, but they're actually they grow them in rows and actually plow them out and actually fertilize them
when they're on the farm, they have briars in them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you.
Like a rose, they look real good, but they're hard to pick.
16.
Well, there you go.
Make some with that.
All right. Distinguished Chairman Roberts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Try to help him out a little bit. Representative Flood, there's certain equipment that's self-propelled used to harvest these crops that was exempt or not included. This helps to include them in there. Specific harvesters for that are propelled.
They're shakers or whatever they're self-propelled with a motor, and they're specifically designed for that purpose also.
Other questions for the officer? Any others? Hearing none, we're going to assign this to the Sales Tax Subcommittee, and I know you know the rules of this committee better than me even.
Yes, sir.
So expect to hear more from you. Thank you, Representative Sims.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
All right, where do we get to now? Is that? Yeah, good. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 141, please.
House Bill 141 by Representative Hembry, the 67th, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from state sales and use tax so as to provide for an exemption with respect to textbooks.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hembry to present his bill. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Good afternoon. Just a simple proposal here, an exemption from state sales tax for students who purchase textbooks. This idea came to me from some students over at Georgia Tech and wanted to get some relief, so they brought this to my attention and would like for the committee to consider it.
I'm curious, is the term textbook defined in the bill? Do you recall?
Yes. Textbook means any book that is principally designed for the use or source of instructional material by a student.
That's going to be an interesting definition to stay with, I think, long term. Are there any questions for the author of this legislation? Chair recognizes Chairman Williams.
22.
You're on.
Representative Hembry. Sir.
Pull the mic a little bit to you.
Okay. You can hear me. Okay. A lot of books now, because of the cost of the new ones, have got used bookstores. Will they be exempt from sales tax also, the people that sell the used books?
Textbook, if you purchased a textbook based on the language, I would think so.
So it would be new or used?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Chair recognizes Representative Knight. Is that correct?
My chairman of higher education on this. I guess my question is part of the substance material. Would this also relate to or include anything that perhaps is on this or electronic format?
I guess it gets back to the issue of the definition of textbook. Now, as you said, today we do have a lot of material that is in form other than what we traditionally consider a textbook. But I guess the definition of textbook, if that applies to that material, then it would exempt those students from that sales tax.
Any other questions? I don't see. Yeah, dude. Who's 14?
Representative Knight covered my question.
Gosh, I was pretty excited about hearing from you, Representative.
Knight beat me to it.
Okay, thank you very much for that scintillating presentation. We're going to assign it to our sales tax subcommittee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very grateful. Members of the committee, thank you for your time.
Hey, look. Is Lunsford here?
I don't see him.
Is Representative Lunsford in the room? He told me he was going to be late. So we'll put that near the back. Representative Day ever come in? No. Okay. 164.
She won't let the others go. That who are waiting.
Okay. Cool. All right. Mr. Secretary, if you would, House Bill 186, please.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cole of the 125th, House Bill 186, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated related to exemptions from sales and use tax, so as to provide for a 5-year exemption regarding the sale of tangible property, tangible personal property.
Chair recognizes Governor's floor leader, Representative Cole. Present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. And on behalf of the Governor, thank you for your time in bringing before you House Bill 186. House Bill 186 is a sales tax exemption for biofuel production facilities. Governor Perdue is proposing to provide an incentive for the construction of alternative fuel production facilities in Georgia based on Georgia-grown products. The proposal includes a sales and use tax exemption for materials and equipment used in the construction of biofuel production facilities that are dedicated to the production and processing of certain biofuels, such as ethanol, biodiesel, and butanol, intended to be derived from Georgia-grown agricultural products and biomass. Estimated state revenue impact is between $2 and $4 million. We do not have a fiscal note at this point. It is coming. Demand for biofuels is expected to increase due to a combination of factors that include a decision by the oil industry to abandon MTBE and due to the aggressive production and promotion of alternative fuel vehicles. The incentive provided in this bill will allow Georgia to remain competitive with other states to retain and attract companies in the biofuel industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your time, and members for your consideration.
Questions for the author? I see number 1. Who is that? Is that Representative Mosby? Number 1? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Stevens, Chairman Stevens.
Just curious, I'm looking at the bill. Is there anything that addresses tax credits at all in this bill?
No.
27? Is that Chairman Scott?
Representative, any discussion about allowing this same exemption for the construction of storage facilities as well as the manufacturing?
Not at this time.
I hope you'll consider that.
We would take that under consideration.
Could you expand on the Georgia products aspect of it? Is the language in the bill, in your opinion, clear to you that it mandates that there be Georgia-grown products?
Well, the intent of this bill is, if you're looking at Georgia's natural resources and ways that Georgia would become a leader in the alternative fuel industry, there are a few areas where we do have an abundance of natural resources. And the governor's intention is to try to, and let me back up a little bit, is the technology for those certain industries have really haven't come to the forefront yet, but they're almost there. So the intention here is maybe to kickstart that, to provide an incentive for certain investment in this area that can put Georgia at the forefront. One of those areas being, the production of cellulosic ethanol, which is derived from pine trees.
Okay, 25. Is that Representative Flood?
Yes. Thank you, Representative Cole. Are there any facilities that are currently in Georgia that produce biomass fuel?
There's one, I believe, up in Rome that is based on chicken fat, and there is a couple other facilities that are being in the infant stages of being constructed that deal with alternative fuels.
This only would apply to new facilities, would it?
Right, after July 1st of 2007.
Okay. Why not allow it to apply to an expansion of an existing facility? Why not allow the exemption to apply to an expansion of an existing facility?
I don't know if that is specifically addressed. That has been one issue that we have, taken into consideration. If a current facility decides to build a new facility that might address a total different type of, biofuel, we're working on the details on that.
Thank you.
Other questions? The author? Thank you, Representative Cole. We're going to assign that to our sales tax subcommittee, and I'm sure you'll be in contact with the chairman there for further deliberation of this legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Secretary, House Bill 198, please.
House Bill 198 by Representative Cassis of the 103rd to amend Article 2, Chapter 7 of Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to imposition, rate, computation of income tax so as to provide for an income tax credit with respect to qualified businesses engaged in biotechnology.
The Chair recognizes Representative David Cassis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to take this first plunge in tax policy after 5 years here. And also, please excuse my ignorance should there be any questions about this bill. But this has come to my attention, and it's something that I've been working on now for almost a year, and brought it to the attention of some of our members in economic development. And it's definitely a step that Georgia needs to take in biotechnology industry. And what this would do is provide the ability for companies that are involved in research and development in the biotechnical field that are actually working at a loss to sell or transfer their tax credits to other Georgia taxpayers. This has a double advantage, especially with economic development, in the fact that the companies, the biotechnical companies that are involved in this research will be allowed to receive cash for those credits that they cannot use and reinvest it in R&D, and also reduce the tax liability of those companies that do have high ones. There are some arbitrary numbers put in there, and we just put them in speaking to Legislative Council, but it will certainly require a study in fiscal impact where it says no more than $40 million. It's capped a year, and also per company a $10 million cap. And those are numbers that we'll definitely have to work with. I do want to add to that, Mr. Chairman, is that Georgia, in the last 3 years consecutively, has moved one step up in biotechnology as far as ranked among the states. We started about 3 years ago at number 8, and we are now ranked at number 6. New Jersey, which implemented this same policy about 4 years ago, was not even on the top 10. They are now in the top 3. This will certainly launch Georgia as a major economic development attraction to biotechnology companies, and then definitely also any other type of company that requires a relief in tax liability.
When you say that the ceiling is $40 million, I guess as determined by the commissioner, is there any methodology in your legislation as far as how the commissioner might allocate that. If I'm the guy at $45 million, how does he decide if he likes me or not? I mean,
Very well. There is a methodology, and
because he doesn't, I can tell you that.
Certainly. And this bill is going to do something interesting, Mr. Chairman, which we have in the language itself, and it's going to create a partnership, if it could ever be created, between the Department of Revenue and the Department of Economic Development. So that we can also give, or at least the Department of Economic Development can give some guidance as to the companies that should be approved or disapproved. But there are guidelines within the legislation as to which companies will receive it. But they're general guidelines, and we're really leaving it up to both departments to come together and come up with regulations.
Okay. Other questions for the author of Hoos number 23?
That's me.
All right, Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You said that something about you might be showing your ignorance, which you didn't, but I guess I'm very ignorant. I'm reading the definition of biotechnology, and I think I've got a little bit of an understanding since I pushed my light. But is there any particular? I suppose this would be proper. Is there any particular company who asked you to do this bill?
No one, Representative Parsons. As a matter of fact, I've been looking and watching very closely what's happening with biotechnology in our state. Now, I will say that the counties of Gwinnett, my home county, and the counties of Hall, and actually going all the way to Athens, is becoming a biotechnical corridor. And there are major things happening in our state that's actually attracting these companies to come down here, which all the attention has been given to the North Carolina Triangle, and now we are competitive. And it's really causing many of the other states to wonder what Georgia is doing that is attracting this type of industry here. I just see a wonderful opportunity to be able to grab some of that market and begin to make Georgia definitely change its image as it's been with a southern state. You usually look at it in other fields, and when you talk about biotechnology, certainly Georgia is never included in the vocabulary until they actually look at the statistics and see what we're doing. And even the state rankings that we're doing. And so my interest in economic development and seeing our state in the future, long term, creating jobs and attracting more industry into our state, this was just a field that I think is something actually plausible, actually something that we could do. And speaking of future positive revenue, I really think that there is an impact short term, but I believe that as these companies begin to use this cash to reinvest it in R&D, and we see more companies moving to Georgia, it's certainly going to be a revenue positive in the future.
Okay. Thank you.
As I understand it, this doesn't create any new credits. It just allows for the transfer of existing credits that have already been earned or allocated.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, and it allows the company, of course, it has to prove that it's working at a loss, that their operating costs are causing negative impact in their company, or they're reporting losses, and they can actually sell that credit for cash.
Which in research environment sometimes is the way it happens. You have sustained losses for a long time until you discover.
That's correct.
28, is that Representative Knight or Representative Jameson? 28. Anybody?
I'm 28, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Representative Casas, on page 2, under qualified businesses, am I given to understand that the only way that these credits can be sold or transferred is between companies that are involved in biotechnology?
That is correct.
So it's like kind of operation, so to speak?
Actually, the companies that can sell or transfer, initiate a sell or transfer, has to be involved in biotechnology. However, the buyer can be any Georgia taxpayer.
Oh, that was my question. If both parties do not have to be involved in biotechnology.
That is correct. Only the seller.
The seller must be involved in biotechnology, but the purchaser can be any company that has fewer than 225 employees.
That is exactly right, and it's also
that's involved in research.
Actually, Representative, the 225 employer, the new and expanding company, only applies to the seller again. So it's going to be new and expanding biotechnology companies. The buyer of the credit can be any Georgia taxpayer.
So are we? Sorry.
Please.
So then we're assuming that this is a new or expanding company, small company, obviously, that has developed a credit.
That it cannot
and
use.
It doesn't need the credit. So they can
correct.
sell or transfer in order to give them a revenue source. Is that correct?
That is exactly correct.
All right, thank
you. Chairman.
24.
Okay, got it. Go. Lewis, Chairman Lewis.
I thought I had answered to my own question until I heard that, and I think that spawns me to ask this question. Being that any company can purchase these credits from a qualified seller, that could produce, at least in the short term, a fiscal impact to the state, and I'm sure you accounted for that. There's not a note in here.
And that's exactly right, Representative Lewis. The number that we're starting off with, and it's going to go up or down depending on the work of this committee, is the $40 million. It cannot go over that amount.
Do you have a rough idea of how many qualifying companies exist today in Georgia?
That would be information that I will certainly have for you in subcommittee, but at this time I do not have.
Well, and the point of me asking that is I'm going to make an assumption there's not very many.
That's right.
So therefore, the fiscal impact should be very minimal. So we're not really, as a state, we're not really losing anything because we haven't done what we can to incentivize this particular industry group yet. And I applaud you for bringing this.
Thank you.
But we will have a fiscal note before it moves much further, I can assure you about that. So we won't have to guess at that. Thank you for a very good presentation. Seeing no further questions, we're going to assign this to our Income Tax Subcommittee and look forward to further deliberations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next is Smith. Bob Smith, 201. Mr. Secretary, House Bill 201.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, House Bill 201 by Representative Smith of the 113th to amend Article 1, Chapter 5, Title 48 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to general provisions relative to ad valorem taxation of property so as to change certain provisions relating to certification of assessed taxable value of property.
Chair recognizes the distinguished chairman of the Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee to present his legislation, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Before I start, I'd like to applaud each and every one of you for your past and your present help in saving this company here at Delta Airlines. And I know there's some proposals that are coming this year to help with that, but due to the hard work that you do in this committee, I applaud you for that. I bring to you House Bill 201, which is a bill that I brought before your committee last year in a much, much smaller environment, it looked like. This is dealing with the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights that we passed about 8 years ago. Backdoor tax increases, we called it. And what has happened in a couple of instances that you have a millage rate advertised for the 3 public hearings. And then when it comes down to the time of the authorizing agent or authority, this particular entity will go to them and say, well, we made a mistake. Instead of a 2 mil increase, we want a 2 1/4 mil increase. Well, then they pass it on, and the revenue commissioner doesn't have he has a little latitude based on their regs and the current law, as I'm told. What this would do would close this. And when you advertise for any millage rate increase, then this advertisement must be a 30 square inch advertisement in some paper that's well read, which is a 6.5 or 6 by 5 advertisement. And in this, they can say that why they're raising the taxes. And we go on and say that the key word is may. They may say why they're raising the taxes. This would then close that loophole where if the Revenue Department found out that there was some things going on that wasn't true, then the Revenue Department could say to that authorizing authority, whether it be the county commissioner or the city council, that you must roll back these taxes to that party that was not in favor. So I ask you for your favorable consideration for this House Bill 201, and this is a friend of the taxpayers bill, I'd call it.
Well, we won't be able to give you our favorable consideration today, Chairman Smith, because we're not going to vote on it, but we're going to assign it to a subcommittee. And thank you for that presentation. We have some questions for you, though. Chairman Stevens?
Sorry, inadvertent.
Okay, 17. Chairman Royal.
Representative Smith, by the way, happy birthday.
Happy birthday, sir. To me? Oh, happy birthday.
Do you have a good working relationship with your levying authorities over there in your district?
Well, in this particular case, when there's a proposal to 3 public hearings of a certain millage rate, and then when it gets down to the decision-making time and there's a movement upward other than what they told the public, I have a problem with that, and that's the reason for bringing this bill, sir.
I'm sure they'd support this legislation, wouldn't they?
It is quite important to the taxpayers of Georgia. Thank you, sir.
Other questions? Chairman Smith, thank you for that presentation, and we are going to assign this to our ad valorem tax subcommittee, and we look forward to it.
Honorable Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, where's him? Mr. Secretary, House Bill 222, please.
House Bill 222 by Representative Mitchell of the 88th to amend Article 2, Chapter 4, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to the authority of counties to buy property sold under tax executions.
Chair recognizes Representative Mitchell to summarize his bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I present to you a bill that certainly will go a long way in doing what is right for the constituents of Georgia. In Georgia presently, the tax commissioners of each county have some discretion as to when they can levy foreclosures for the non-payment of taxes. What this bill would do would prohibit the tax commissioner or anyone from his staff from purchasing property in that county that was seized as a result of delinquent taxes. I might suggest to you that the only class of citizens that this would impact would be tax commissioners, and the Tax Commissioners Association has endorsed this legislation. Some of you may be aware that this bill escaped the scrutiny of the Judiciary Committee last year unanimously. In anticipation of that bill going back to Judiciary, it is co-sponsored by the Judiciary Chair as well as the Ethics Chair. However, my guess is someone read taxes in it and assigned this to this committee, but I have every confidence in the ability of this committee to also see that this is great legislation suggested by the officer of the Tax Commissioners Association, who at that time lived in my district. He passed away, the tax commissioner of DeKalb County, so would ask you to be signed to the appropriate subcommittee. I might also say that some of you are aware that this bill made it to the rules calendar, but we just ran out of time.
Questions for the author? Who is 16? Or Senator Roberts?
Representative Mitchell, let me just to make sure I understand this right. Let's say everything goes through. You have public hearings, everything is out there in the open. You're still telling me at that point a tax commissioner cannot go and purchase property under this bill?
If it was seized for non-payment of taxes, yes, this would prohibit the tax commissioner or members of his staff from purchasing that property. There's an ethics code in the Tax Commissioners Association. Even the mere appearance of impropriety is one that should not be preyed upon the public. Okay. I might also add to concert with your concern that the laws on this vary from almost community to community right now. There are some tax commissioners who have, as a result of their rules, that not only can they not purchase or their staff, but family members of themselves or their staffs. This simply says that if they or their staff, who, as I'm sure you know, Representative, they have superior information, and as I said, they have some discretion as to when that foreclosure may happen. I think that this justice screams out that this be law.
Uh, 14 was that okay? The chair recognizes Representative Lindsay.
Well, your last comment raises a question. I think it was a question that some of us had in the judiciary last year, which was why not include immediate family members?
I'm open to
take out that sort of collusion.
I'm open to an amendment. I'm not opposed to amending the bill.
Have you given any thought? I'm sorry. I've got other questions. 29, is that Representative Knight?
Yes, Representative Mitchell. I was wondering if have there been any cases that may have prompted this bill?
I'm so glad that you asked that question. It gives me an opportunity to tell you about a personal story. There was a subdivision in my district that had a clubhouse where all the members were to pay an assessment to go in part for the taxes of that clubhouse. As the situation evolved, they got behind in their taxes and received notice that it was going to be foreclosed at a particular date. At their wits' end, they called their state representative, myself. I, in turn, called our tax commissioner to see what, if anything, could be done. As it turned out, he said he would exercise his discretion in the law and postpone the foreclosure to allow them additional time to raise that money. I will say at that exact same time, there was a much celebrated case that I hesitate to mention because the person is not the issue, but there was a much celebrated case where a tax commissioner at that time quickly foreclosed on the property so that he could purchase the property at a very discounted price and in turn sold it almost immediately for a huge price. So I was thinking that when we had those discussions, what if my tax commissioner had an interest in that particular property, perhaps the outcome for that subdivision, that set of consumers and citizens would not have been as good. And I must also add, by giving them that additional time, they were able to get up the additional monies and bring the clubhouse out of foreclosure. As I said, I think that the circumstances of justice screams out that we do the right thing.
We certainly appreciate your presentation, and we will be assigning House Bill 222 to our ad valorem tax subcommittee, and if you'll just contact the chairman there, or the secretary in the Ways and Means office, we'll arrange for further hearings and deliberation of this good legislation. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman. Mr. Secretary, if you would, House Bill 148.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 148 by Representative Burkhalter. 50th, to amend Code Section 4883 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to exemptions from state sales and use tax so as to provide for exemption with respect to sale of tangible property or in construction or expansion of an aquarium for a limited period of time.
Chair recognizes a co-author of this legislation, Representative Smith. And could I get you to chair here for a second? I've got to run down the hall.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Representative Smith, welcome to the committee once again. Please present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. I'm bringing you House Bill 148. Representative Burkhalter could not be here, and I saw that it had not been called. So this is an exciting piece of legislation. We have an exceptional corporate citizen in Atlanta called Mr. Bernie Marcus, who he built the first aquarium, one of the greatest gifts that Georgia has seen in modern history. And at that time, the legislative body had a proposal that deleted the sales tax that would be charged on goods and services as this aquarium was built. And if you'll look at the bill there, it said from June the 4th, 2003, ending on January the 1st, 2007. Well, I have some news for you, and the reason for this proposition is that we would like to get, with your help, to extend this sales tax freedom date till the year 2011. It is our understanding that, and I have had conversations with Mr. Bernie Marcus and Mr. Jeffrey Swanigan, who is the aquarium director, that they are looking at expanding this aquarium one more time because the people that have come visited this aquarium has far exceeded their expectations. It greatly exceeded their expectations, and they're looking at another expansion of $100 to $150 million in short order. And that's not a promise, but if we can allow them to extend this sales tax holiday until 2011, it would be very appreciated. And the state of Georgia would be the winner in this, as well as the nation. So I appreciate your favorable consideration of this.
Thank you, Representative Smith. Do we have questions from the committee members? Representative Royal, number 17.
Mr. Smith, do you know the dollar value of the expansion? Did you say that, or did I miss it? Or
well,
the fiscal note says similar savings as initially, which was $14 million.
Well, this is anytime you have a gift from someone, or in this particular case, another $100 to $150 million investment, then we would do the math and the sales tax appropriately. We think it'd be around $8 to $12 million.
Okay, I just didn't see that. No. Thank you.
20. Thank you. Secretary's got 23. Is that Chairman Parsons?
I did. Chairman Smith, I guess I'm a little confused. You had said, well, first of all, you said that they would appreciate the tax break, which I'm sure that they would. But then you talked about the sales and the number of people coming and expansion. And I see who it's for. I'm just curious why we would give them. Why would we be interested in giving them a tax break? I mean, you talked about the increase in sales. They're expanding. Why would we want to give a tax break to this entity, and especially with the amount of money that these people have to begin with? I'm a little confused why we want to give them a tax break, extend a tax break.
Thank you for the question, Chairman Parson. I would say that when you have a gift from a great Georgian for $300+ million to the state of Georgia, for something that is a destination point for Georgia. Now we have the World of Coke that's coming online. This is across from the Centennial Park. It's and the World Congress Center, where millions of square feet are there, and the Phillips Arena and the World and the Dome, where millions of people come through this area. And now this corporate donor is willing to step to the plate one more time without any taxpayer dollars. And we're looking for that break to encourage him to spend that extra $100 to $150 million. Now, if we charge him sales tax for another $8 to $10 to $12 million, and that is $8 to $10 to $12 million less that he can expand this facility and or other types of fish or aquatic type animals.
Thank you.
And as far as a fiscal note is concerned, this would it's a gift to the state for the most part. It's something that draws people to this great city and our great state.
Further questions for the author? Seeing none, we're going to...
I have one, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The chair recognizes Representative Graves.
Mr. Chairman, up near where I am, we're near the Tennessee border where they have the Chattanooga Aquarium as well. And I know when the Georgia Aquarium was built and this legislation was first proposed, it talked about new construction. Would this allow the owners of the Tennessee Aquarium to do an expansion?
What was the question, the last one?
Would this allow the owners or the folks that own the Tennessee Aquarium to do an expansion in this same time period and buy their materials in Georgia and exempt from sales tax?
This was for Georgia aquariums, specifically toward the...
The original says new construction, so that kept it very limited, so you might want to consider that, because an expansion is what the new language is here, and Tennessee may take advantage of that.
I think you make a very good point, Representative. As you read the language, there's very little limitation in the language. I don't think you get over further in Tennessee if you bought the materials in Georgia and it was an aquarium.
Right.
That's an astute point. We look forward to further debate on this legislation. Thank you for presenting it for the Pro Tem. We'll assign it to the Sales Tax Subcommittee. All right. Chairman Royal, do you wish to take the podium? You want to present from your seat?
Whatever you're...
That's your choice, sir. You're a hard-working man. You may need to sit down.
That's a nice way of saying I'm old.
No, sir. I can't call nothing old. You walked on dirt younger than me. House Bill 219, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill simply does for the local portion of the motor fuel tax what we did 2 or 4 years ago, I've forgotten how long, in the collection of motor fuel taxes. As you will remember, we had a lot of convenience stores in the state who were not remitting the correct amount of sales taxes on motor fuel. The state portion, 4%, was charged in a fixed amount, and a prepaid sales tax is collected millions of dollars in addition to the normal sales tax. And we left the local governments out, the 2 to 3% of local governments. So this simply brings in the local governments on their collection in the same manner we did the state's portion.
Chairman Robert, do you have a question?
I have a question.
As I recall, Chairman Royal, although I would never suggest that anyone out there would ever have cheated on taxes, it seemed that when we changed the method of this, it was well over $40-some-odd million of revenue generated at the wholesale level. And
that's correct. We're probably getting a lot on the 3% for the local taxes. That doesn't include all of the in-store sales. We probably need to look at that sometime for the cigarettes and other items in the convenience stores.
And the method of computation will be the same look-back method that is currently in...
Yes, the Department of Revenue established that.
Which has become a tried and true method of...
Yes, they correct it when the prices fluctuate. They correct it on a quarterly basis for the 6 months.
Well, I certainly... and also understand that... intimately involved in this, what I consider great legislation, has been the Georgia Oilmen Association, the people that participate in this business at the wholesaler level. Isn't that right?
They have assisted in every way, yes.
And we certainly appreciate that on this. Any other questions for the author of this legislation? Okay, we're going to... No, 1225. What number was this again? 219. We're going to assign this to our Sales and Use Tax Subcommittee. Okay, Mr. Secretary, if you would read House Bill 225.
Bill 225 by Representative Royal, the 171st, and others, to amend Code Section 48727, the official code of Georgia annotated relating to computation of taxable net income for state income tax purposes.
Chair recognizes Chairman Royal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Office of the Treasury brought this legislation to me. It deals with the college savings plans. Currently, there's a $100,000 cap on the income of those participating. And this essentially does two things. It removes the $100,000 cap. If you will remember, when we first did Hope Scholarship, it had a income cap on that, and we removed that. This simply removes the $100,000 income cap, and it also allows grandparents to contribute to these college savings plans also for a maximum of a $2,000 tax credit, income tax deduction, excuse me.
Okay. Are there any questions from members of the committee? We actually have some folks here that could further enlighten us if we needed to, and we appreciate their attendance. They've waited a long time. Anybody have any questions? We're going to assign that to the Income Tax Subcommittee and look forward to that legislation moving rapidly. And thank you all for being with us, too. Okay. What's next? Do we have anything left but Scotland's? Are there any other authors of legislation in the room that have been waiting for their legislation that are not members of the committee? Speak now, forever hold your peace. All right, Mr. Secretary, read whatever number of yours you wish to go first on.
All right, I have my complete legislative agenda here for you, Chair. House Bill 164 by Representative Scott II to amend Code Section 4883 of the official code of Georgia annotated related to exemptions from state sales and use tax so as to broaden exemption with respect to sales tax to churches.
Please present your bill.
Mr. Chairman, I think that that this bill is something that's long awaited for, something that's needed. Our state is currently taxing churches, and I see it as a way to expand, just to go beyond pipe organs and steeple bells, where we give churches currently a break, and to give them a break on the building of churches of any size and any shape and any order wherever they are in the state of Georgia. And this is just an attempt to help out our churches, and also, in my view, to help the state avoid taxing churches, which I would believe that it's not a good idea for states to tax churches anyway.
Chair recognizes Chairman Stevens.
I'm a little confused. I thought we'd already exempted churches and their property from it.
I thought that was the case too, but it's actually not the case, and this would bring that into what I think most. In fact, that's the comment I get most often, is that they thought it was they were already exempt. But I had a group of
property taxes. The property owners do. This is sales taxes on their purchases, all tangible personal property. It could be anything from a pew to a carpet or a throw rug under this language as I see it. Do we have a fiscal note on this, do you know?
No, sir, and I know we'll need to have one before we proceed. That is for sure.
Okay. It has been requested. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
yes, please,
in
Chairman.
addition, is there a sunset on this, or is it just going to be permanent?
I have not asked for a sunset on this. I really, to me, it's not a matter of revenue. It's just a matter of trying to do the right thing with it and trying to bring the law into line with matters of separation.
Well, I doubt that argument is going to overrule. You may do better than that in subcommittee, but don't get too reliant upon that when it comes back to the full committee.
Can I move to pass now?
Officer of this committee. And thank you, Chairman Stevens, for pointing that out. We'll assign this to the Sales and Use Tax Committee. Yeah, sure, you certainly may.
Are we now talking about exemption from sales tax, such things as office supplies and things of that nature that are sold to churches?
Yes, ma'am, that would be the intention of this legislation. HB
Again,
160.
sales and use tax. Secretary, if you would read the next.
HB 165, to amend Code Section 4849 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to dealers, sales, and use tax so as to change certain provisions regarding the estimated tax liability.
You want to present, or you want Representative Graves to present this one?
I'm trying to see if it conflicts here with one I just saw a minute ago.
I think he's got laryngitis, Mr.
Oh, no,
Chairman.
it's a different code.
Recognized for the purpose of presenting your bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that I brought before this committee a year ago, and it is to eliminate the estimated tax liability that's paid by anyone who collects sales tax in the state of Georgia. Currently in the state of Georgia, if someone collects sales tax, a retailer, for the purpose of remitting it to the state of Georgia, they are required after a certain period of time, say 3 months, to have a running average of their sales tax, and the Department of Revenue will require them to remit an extra month's tax liability, or an estimated tax liability that they might have against future revenues that they would collect for the department. And what this does is just create a little fairness there. We're wanting to be a pro-business state. We're wanting to invite jobs into this state, and what this does is it says that we, the state of Georgia, are willing to take a little bit of risk along with the risk takers of this state and allow them to keep that cash in their wallet instead of in the wallet of the state.
Any questions for the author of this bill? We'll assign that to our sales tax subcommittee. Secretary, further read.
I'll go ahead and go with HB 178 at this time. HB 178 is a more moderate approach, I suppose, to this idea. And while I would like to be able to see what the fiscal impact of doing away with it all entirely this year, I realize after talking with certain people in this body and on other floors of the legislature that it might be a more feasible approach to attempt to just adjust that taxable threshold from 5,000 to 10,000. Last year, you might remember that we adjusted this threshold that dealers have from 2,500 to 5,000, and I would like to try to adjust that from 5,000 to 10,000. And this is something that, in case the other is too much, I'd like to be able to move on this.
Do we have a fiscal note for either of these? Both requests. Questions? Anybody? We'll sign that to sales tax as well. Secretary will further read.
HB 175 to amend Code Section 48720 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to individual income tax rates and taxable tables.
Recognized to present the bill.
And let's see here. Mr. Chairman, this is a matter of fundamental tax fairness, and the state of Georgia currently does not adjust its tax tables ever, unless this General Assembly passes legislation. What this does is it forces the Department of Revenue to adjust annually the tax tables according to CPI. So should the growth rate of the Consumer Price Index be 3%, the tax tables will be adjusted 3%, and it prevents what is called bracket creep, and that's where if a taxpayer receives a cost of living adjustment, they might fall into a new tax bracket, and so this will keep them from paying additional taxes simply by receiving a cost of living adjustment, which, as we all know, is not really a raise, Mr. Chairman. It's simply helping them keep up with the economic times. Last year,
for income taxes?
Income tax brackets, yes, sir.
And we have brackets from $1 to 10,000, and then
that's right.
Everything else is 6%.
The overwhelming majority of this would go to the lowest income earners, Mr. Chairman, who are paying income tax.
Other questions for the author? Assign this one to the Income Tax Subcommittee. Secretary will further read.
HB 176, to amend Chapter 7, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to income tax, so as to provide for a gradual reduction in the state income tax rate for corporations over a period of years, and to abolish it eventually.
You recognize to summarize your bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is an attempt to do away with a horrible tax, I believe, in the state of Georgia, and that is the corporate income tax. We want to invite jobs and economic development of this state, and it's my firm belief that this committee is no disrespect to the chairman of economic development, but this committee certainly rivals the Committee on Economic Development and Tourism for economic development in this state. And you talk about a way to invite companies to our state, and that is to do away with the corporate income tax and do away with double taxation on corporate earnings.
Questions for the author? Yeah. Chair recognizes Representative Royal. What number? 7.
Scott, this thing looks familiar.
Mr.
Where have I seen this before?
You know, Mr. Chairman, what is it they say, that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery?
It looks like you'd at least let me sign it.
I was looking for you on the floor. I had you on everything else.
Was that an accusation of plagiarism, man?
Wherever the shoe fits.
I think we'll assign this one to the our new tax reform subcommittee. I'm curious as to how you're going to replace the $600 million of revenue it generates now. We'll get there, but we'll read, Mr. Secretary.
HB 204, Representative Scott, to amend Chapter 7, Title 48, Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to income taxes so as to change certain tax brackets for computing the income tax.
Please explain your bill.
Mr. Chairman, this is an attempt to do away with to reduce the top tax bracket in Georgia from 6% down to 5%. In a sense, I would call it a rollback, similar to what the counties are required to do, provided that they don't announce that they're doing a tax increase. And so this would give back some of the money that the taxpayers of Georgia have paid on an individual basis. And it also, it is, I've talked to Legislative Council extensively, and I want to make sure that we review all these changes on pages 3 and 4 for sure, but the intent is to spread this tax cut across the board to all taxpayers who pay taxes in the state of Georgia.
We have a fiscal note on this as well. Any? Is that ordered? A question? Questions? I'm going to assign it to the new tax reform subcommittee. Are you almost finished?
Mr. Chairman, that's my legislative agenda for today.
Well, what about for the next decade?
That's a fair question, Representative. I think. Is there anybody that has come in that I didn't see that has legislation come before this committee? I especially want to take this opportunity to thank those of you that are still alive and breathing on this committee that didn't leave us. This is hard work. Sometimes the people's work. We sometimes try to make it interesting or at least humorous at this point, but I think we all benefit from a prior knowledge of what's going on. We're likely to have over 100 bills in this committee by the beginning of March, and keeping up with that for everybody is going to be a difficult undertaking. So I thank you all and commend each of you for staying with us and participating. And if there's no further business come before the committee, we stand adjourned.
He thinks of something else. Mr. Chairman.